So our movie deals with this history, but we take it into America today. You know, the first communist front ever formed in this country was before the Bolshevik Revolution. It was the Methodist Committee for Social Action. Because the communists knew the churches were the backbone of America. They knew they couldn't take America from the outside, so they had to get into the backbone to twist and pervert it. In the 1920s, the Communist Party told its people to go into the churches. If you're brought up Baptist, become a Baptist again. If you're brought up Episcopalian, become Episcopalian. If you're brought up Jewish, go back to the synagogue. Not to learn anything spiritual, but to take communism into the churches. I had a great friend, Herb Romerstein, who was a communist, who became an anti-communist, then he was the US Senate's communist expert. He testified, gave expert testimony for years. He said, Trevor, the biggest suckers for communist fronts in the 1920s and 30s in this country, and into the 40s and 50s, were Protestant clergymen. They could be suckered into any socialist scheme going, he said. Now, in the 1970s, so a lot of people, you know, these communists would get into the church. They affiliated with the National Council of Churches, which were affiliated with the World Council of Churches, which was controlled by the Soviet KGB. They used to call it the Communist Party at Prayer. So American Christianity was co-opted big time. And this drove a lot of Christians out of the churches. You know, they were getting 80% socialism and 20% Christianity, and they were not happy. So a lot of them went into the evangelical movement. And the evangelicals tended to be much more biblically observant, much more orthodox in their views, and very politically conservative. But in the 1970s, there was an attempt by Richard Mao of SDS, Ron Sider, and a whole bunch of others. They set up a thing called the Chicago Declaration. It was about bringing Marxism and socialism into the evangelical world. And the Chicago Declaration, which calls for redistribution of wealth and all this kind of thing. They tried to start this movement on the back of the Jesus freak movement of the 1970s. But it didn't really pick up. What did pick up was the moral majority of the 80s. You know, Reagan, you know, Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson. They really set the evangelical world alight. You know, because they talked about America, about Orthodox Christianity, they talked about faith, they talked about America first. And that was a great movement, and the left-wing evangelicals, they didn't get any traction. But what they did, they went into the Bible schools, they went into the colleges, they went into the theology schools, and they worked their way up, and they indoctrinated hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pastors into what we now call the woke movement. You know, social justice, redistribution of wealth, critical race theory, Marxism applied to race rather than class, welcoming refugee resettlement, ending global warming. All of this woke stuff came out of the movement of the 1970s. It's been infiltrating and percolating through Christianity to now it's dominant. And they got a big boost in the 70s because a lot of young Marxists didn't want to get drafted to fight communists in Vietnam. They took draft deferments and went into the Bible colleges to teach communism in America. Now the big one, see, you can look at it from a communist point of view. They have Hollywood. They have the Democratic Party. They have most of the media. They have the unions. They have education. They have sport. They have a lot of corporations. They have most things. What they didn't have was the evangelicals and the Baptists. And these are the crazy people that every now and then would get up and vote for a Ronald Reagan or a Donald Trump. And this would set the commies back 10, 20 years. You think that might have annoyed them a little bit? So, in our movie, we name a lot of names. Steve Dace, who's a very famous commentator, looked at our movie, checked it, and he said, there are no sacred cows in this movie at all. None. We name names. We talk about the people who have infiltrated the Southern Baptists, the Gospel Coalition, you know, very famous Christians, Tim Keller, who's widely respected. Some of you may have read his books. The man is a Marxist, folks. He set up the Gospel Coalition in 2005 to bring left-wing ideas into the evangelical movement. He came out very anti-Trump in the last election, really blew his cover. But he would quote, we went through 10 years of his sermons, he would quote Marxists or postmodernist philosophers something like 180 times in the last 10 years. And he set up the Gospel Coalition. He had Tabili Nwale on his board, a man who used to be called Ron Burns, who was a pro-Cuban communist, who became a black Muslim and then a Christian, but still talks exactly like he did when he was a black Muslim or a Marxist. He had Mark Devers of 9 Marks, who openly promotes Marxist, racist literature through Christianity Today and other forums. Then they got into the Southern Baptists. They basically, the Southern Baptists just passed critical race theory a couple of years ago as part of the church toolbox for dealing with issues of racism. Critical race theory is real simple. The old communists were all about class. The working class will rise up and take the wealth of the bourgeoisie. Occupy Wall Street, the 99% versus the 1%. That was a classic Marxist argument. But it got a bit of traction, but not much. But since the class arguments don't work much in America, you don't have a class structure here. You can start out dirt poor and end up filthy rich. You can start out filthy rich and end up dirt poor too, which is how it should be. It's a system, the American free enterprise system. But race is always with you. So critical race theory, which was started by the Maoist communists, the people behind Black Lives Matter, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, instead of the oppressed people, oppressed workers rising up against the capitalists, now it's the oppressed peoples of colour rising up to take the power from the white Christian capitalist patriarchy. Critical race theory is pure Maoist, pro-Chinese, communist Marxism. But it's in churches all over your country, it's in your government, it's in your corporations, and it's in your schools. And believe me, when you get rid of critical race theory out of your school, that's great. You've got to understand, Marxism is in every subject in your schools. The math is Marxist. The chemistry is Marxist. The history certainly is. So it's all through your schools, people. It's not just critical race theory. So what we show in the Southern Baptists, once the largest Protestant denomination in the country, and a very politically conservative denomination, the backbone in some ways of American conservative politics. You imagine if you could flip the evangelicals and the Baptists to the left, what would that do to the politics of this country? Exactly what it is doing, folks. People, the young pastors who used to come out of your Bible colleges, the great Baptist seminary here in Dallas, once rock solid, now it's now woke, it's now Marxist, folks. So the pastors who used to come out voting for Ronald Reagan, supporting Israel and hating communism, are now coming out supporting Bernie Sanders and Palestine and loving socialism. That is what is happening right now. And our movie exposes this in shocking ways. Names the people, shows them in their own words. This will be the most controversial movie done on Christianity, I think, ever. Ever. Because it pulls no punches. So you can download it, go to Enemies Within the Church, pay-per-view. You can come and see me later. We can $20 a copy. We can take your name and address, pay for it, and we'll mail them out to you at the end of the month, a hard copy. There's a little bit of a supply chain problem, and so